market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning. Welcome to The Pulse. I'm Guy Johnson in London. Let's talk about what's happening in the car sector. That's the big story, certainly this Monday morning. Honda and Nissan have agreed to start merger talks. The two Japanese automakers say they aim to sign a final deal by next June. This also includes Mitsubishi, by the way. It's going to be a holding company. We think that's probably going to be in place end of June into August. At a press conference a little bit earlier on today, the former Nissan chairman, Carlos Ghosn, said the tie-up, though, doesn't make a lot of sense to him.
A potential alliance or partnership between the two companies are going to be another company fighting for survival and relevance into this industry. But without any doubt, they're going to have a tough time against the Chinese, against companies like Tesla.
The press conference in Tokyo between these three companies is ongoing. Just bear that in mind. You're going to continue to see headlines coming out. Our global auto editor, Craig Trudell, joins me around the desk. Craig, Carlos Ghosn's not impressed. Is everybody else impressed? Is this a deal that needs to get done? Is this the right format? What are people saying?
I think some of the points that Mr. Ghosn made on Friday are absolutely valid. This idea that these are two companies that are very big in Japan and very big in some markets where they sort of share commonality. Does it make a whole lot of sense if you are putting two companies together that have significant overlap in where they are geographically, where they are product-wise? I do think that there are some merits to this in the sense that Nissan is a company that has missed the mark in terms of hybrids, and we've seen a real renaissance there. There's some potential for making up for some of Nissan's shortcomings in that regard. But for the most part, these are two struggling companies with similar challenges in terms of where they're positioned, and there doesn't seem to be much sort of rationale here other than Nissan is in real trouble and needs significant help and fast.
Let's talk a little bit about what is happening with Volkswagen this morning as well, because in some ways there's huge parallels between what is happening in Japan and what's happening in Europe right now. Struggling auto sectors in both. And you kind of look at what we've got from Volkswagen, the deal that they've done with the unions, and you look at the market reaction this morning. When I came in first thing this morning, we were expecting Volkswagen to pop like 2-3%. That hasn't happened. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we take a look back and we think about, what sort of 2024 is going to go down, for the automotive industry, it's the year that the Chinese really just absolutely sort of exerted their will on this industry. And we've seen now, two major Japanese players potentially need to join forces as a result of this. And in Germany, an attempt to do what has the writing's been sort of on the wall that they've needed to do, which is really get competitive, restructure themselves, get that VW brand into a position where they can compete in this new sort of world order. And we saw a real letdown in terms of what management put out there as what needed to be done, potentially closing 3 plants, really significantly bringing costs down. I think management is trying to save face and say that they've done that, but they aren't closing any plants in Germany, and they absolutely are in a position where they need to significantly, lighten up. And it's probably the case that we're just going to return to this issue in 2025. As
Europe needs to become more productive. It needs to become more competitive. That's the Volkswagen story, and in some ways that's the story coming out of Japan as well. Craig, great stuff this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us with all the coverage. That press conference ongoing in Tokyo. Craig Trudell joining us all over that story and all over what is happening with Volkswagen. Paul Hollingsworth, Head of Developed Market Economics at BNP Paribas, joining us also around the table. Good morning.
Morning.
You look at what is happening in the auto sector, and it's just kind of emblematic. Tokyo, the story there, big merger coming through. Germany really struggling. Europe in particular is really struggling with productivity. It's struggling with competitiveness. Do you see any signs of that changing in 2025?
I think these are things that will take a very long time to change. I'd say if there were some silver linings is that policymakers know what needs to be done. We've had the Draghi report, we've had the Letta report from earlier this year. So there are now a concrete set of policy proposals. The question is whether policymakers will now take those up and actually start to implement them.
The problem with that as well is that we've just got huge amounts of political instability in Europe. You look at what is happening in France, we've got elections coming up in Germany. this doesn't feel like a recipe for kind of making progress. Yeah, great, we've got a Draghi report. We know what the roadmap should look like, but whether or not we're going to follow it, as you say, is a big and open question.
Absolutely. Political stasis in Paris and Berlin is clearly not going to help take things forward. But some of that may start to clear as we move into 2025. The German elections, coming up in February, and if we end up with a more stable coalition out of that, potentially a grand coalition, that could be something that paves the way for some positive developments, not only at the European level but also within Germany. There is talk of potential reform of the debt brake. I think that would be a game changer from a fiscal perspective and something that could at least help to strengthen the German economy, and that would have potential positive spillovers for the rest of the bloc.
Does the surprise in 2025 come from Europe then? I feel like I'm grasping at straws here when I've got Trump over here and the United States.
So look, it's quite easy to be pessimistic about Europe right now, and certainly when I speak to investors, there is a lot of pessimism already out there and already in the price. And I think that is the key thing, is that everyone knows the combination of structural and cyclical challenges that the European economy faces even before Trump takes office. But we now have some potential silver linings that probably are not yet priced. As I say, right. German fiscal policy and the expectations that something could come from that. We've already seen expectations that more defence spending will come, and that could be something that is also positive from a growth perspective. So perhaps there could be some surprises coming purely because everyone is so pessimistic to begin with.
Do you think European economics allow for a 5% GDP spend on defence?
I think 5% would be quite challenging, not only for Europe. I mean, if I look at the latest NATO report from back in June, you saw 23 out of 32 members are spending 2% of GDP on defence, but the median is only 2.1. So to go from 2.1 to 5 is a big, big stretch. Some countries clearly have much more fiscal space than others, Germany being one of them. But this comes down to the point, and it's something you've already been discussing this morning. There are common issues, climate being one, defence being another. How do you fund it? Is it done at a national level? That becomes difficult because different countries have different fiscal spaces. Or is it something that is done more at a European level? And I think that's potentially where the discussion is going to be moving in 2025.
How helpful is the ECB going to be in Europe in 2025? It was interesting. I was talking to ING a little bit earlier on, saying they should have done 50, they should have already gone, they should have moved. But I'm listening to Makhlouf out of Ireland this morning as well, talking about the fact that we get to neutral, we don't go any further, we don't get accommodative. And most assumptions are that neutral's kind of 2.5 in Europe. Do we stop there? Do you think the ECB can get accommodative and support the European economy?
So our own estimate of neutral is it's a range and somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5. So our expectation is that the ECB will cut to 2, so the middle of that range.
Right.
We think that's consistent with the outlook as we face 2025. The fundamentals of the recovery are still in place. One, consumer real incomes are going up. This is positive. And two is we have the impact of ECB cuts that have already been delivered and are expected to continue to be delivered. That is going to start feeding through into the economy as well. We already see that in things like the ECB's bank lending survey. The demand for borrowing is picking up. We need to see that follow through into actual real economic growth, but we think we can expect that as we move into 2025. That will help to offset some of the headwinds that we see from, let's say, geopolitical uncertainty.
If Rachel Reeves wants to deliver a reset in the UK in January to what has been delivered thus far, the budget seems to have had a fairly negative impact, and the data support that idea that we've seen this morning. What does she need to do? What needs to change in the UK to get the numbers moving in the right direction rather than the wrong direction?
So I think the UK faces a challenging situation at the moment in that growth on the one hand has been quite weak. We saw some of the figures this morning suggesting the economy has been barely growing at all.
Yep.
On top of that, the inflationary pressures are there. So if you like to put this into a global perspective, the UK has, let's say, slightly better growth than Europe if I think about the outlook for next year, but the inflation that looks more like the US. So you have quite a challenging combination here.
That sounds like stagflation to me.
The directional moves are very much there. I wouldn't characterise it as stagflation. We see the UK growing next year. We have 1.4% growth as our forecast. So we think the recovery will be coming through. And one thing to pull back on the budget point, we have seen a lot of pessimism around that, particularly from the business community.
Yep.
But if we go back to the OBR's expectation of the measures, it was actually that it would boost growth. So you have on the one hand this impact on businesses, but you also had government spending which is going to be picking up.
So we haven't seen the effects of that yet.
I think that's right.
The problem with that is that it's really hard to judge the efficiency of government. I don't know whether that money is going to be positive or whether it's going to be wasted. And at the moment, the OBR seems to be assuming that there's quite a lot of positivity coming through from that government spending. the potential for waste seems quite high as well.
I think there's uncertainty exactly on that point. I would also say there's uncertainty on other elements like the national insurance contributions and the rise there in terms of who pays. Does this come from businesses simply passing on the increase in their labour costs onto prices, in which case it becomes an inflationary shock? Is it something that leads to lower headcounts? We certainly see that from some of the survey evidence as well. So there are a lot of uncertainties for the UK heading into next year. And that inflationary consequence is something that the Bank of England is going to have to grapple, because on the one hand you have weaker growth and you also have stronger inflation, and that's why, if I again put this into a global context, it looks like the BOE will continue with a cautious easing cycle. We think they'll cut once per quarter.
Gradual.
Whereas gradual. Whereas the ECB seems to be on a more of a swift cutting cycle. We think every single meeting until they get back to 2.
Have a great Christmas, Paul. Thanks for stopping by to see us just before Christmas Eve. Paul Hollingsworth, Head of Developed Markets Economics at BNP Paribas. OK, we're going to turn from the UK to France next. The French Prime Minister struggling to meet a self-imposed deadline to name a new cabinet. We thought it was going to be last night. Now appears it's going to be Christmas is the new deadline. We'll discuss all of that next. This is Bloomberg. Fifteen minutes past the hour. Welcome back. The French Prime Minister, François Bayrou, running out of time to meet his self-imposed deadline to name a new cabinet that can survive a no-confidence vote in Parliament. So the new government's top priority, crafting a 2025 budget, also surviving, I think, is probably a priority. Bayrou aiming to finalise that budget by mid-February. Claudia Cohen in Paris. Claudia, we were expecting a government last night. We are now apparently going to get one on Christmas Eve. Why the delay?
The delay, so the new Prime Minister Bayrou met Macron yesterday twice, and so we were expecting an announcement, but they did say that they were doing final adjustments. So the final adjustments are actually trying to convince people to join the new cabinet because, for instance, the right-wing party, the Republican, they had some really clear red lines, and they were expecting kind of a written agreement to make sure that those red lines will not be crossed. And as we know, this morning, François Bayrou actually sent a document to the right-wing party stating that all their demands, if we can say that, will be met.
In terms of, other than surviving, what is the priority for this new government? What is job number one? What does it need to get done?
I mean, job number one is to close the widening French deficit. As you know, the public deficit should be more than 6% of GDP next year, which is a lot, like one of the main figure in European country. So this will be number one priority. But this is kind of a tricky equation because François Bayrou, I said that he wouldn't put too much pressure on business because, as you recall, with the ex-Prime Minister Michel Barnier, like a lot of tax raise were supposed to happen on corporate. He said that this wouldn't happen, and then he said that he was ready to also reopen the French pension reform. So the main priority would be, okay, you need to close the deficit, but where would you find the money, actually? And we don't know that yet. So French people, French opposition also are expecting to know a bit more about that in the next few weeks.
In terms of what the French people expect from this next government, how high are expectations? How low are expectations? Is there an expectation that this government can last until Easter? What are people talking about in Paris?
People are just saying how messy the situation is, and unfortunately, I think that the expectations are quite low. I don't know if you saw that, but there was a poll released yesterday saying that François Bayrou popularity is extremely low, like one of the lowest, only a few days after becoming prime minister. I think the expectations are quite low, and what's the most important thing, I would say, for French people, but also for businesses, is that there won't be too much disruption, you know. Everybody is just like, we'll see what happens, but we just hope that the road until the next presidential election in 2027 will be quite smooth. The expectations are low.
Yep. My experience of French roads is they are quite smooth. But Claudia, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Claudia Cohen in Paris, thank you very much indeed. We're going to carry on with the political instability. Up next, a feud over the Panama Canal. Donald Trump threatening to reimpose US control over the waterway. Who saw this one coming? We'll talk about it next. This is Bloomberg. So, the second term doesn't even start for a month. Trump, though, is already sending shockwaves around the world. The latest shockwave, the Panama Canal. Who'd have thought that one was coming? The president-elect claiming the Panama Canal has fallen into the wrong hands, and the US vessels are being charged exorbitant fees. He's threatened to reimpose American control of this key waterway.
The fees being charged by Panama are ridiculous, highly unfair, especially knowing the extraordinary generosity that has been bestowed to Panama, I say very foolishly, by the United States. This complete ripoff of our country will immediately stop. It's going to stop.
Every square meter of the Panama Canal and its surroundings belongs to Panama and will continue to be. The sovereignty and the independence of our country are non-negotiable.
Who saw this one coming? Jill Desis joins us now to discuss. Jill, what do we make of this? What do we make of this threat?
Well, Guy, it looks like, once again, Trump's kind of wading into, yet another grievance he's kind of taken with another country. We've seen this sort of protectionist attitude toward Trump that Trump has indicated toward other nations before, saying basically they need to pay their fair share, that kind of thing. It does seem like this time around, again, he's saying that, he's claiming that American vessels are charged these exorbitant fees passing through the canal. Obviously, you've heard the Panamanian president, kind of push back against that. Worth noting, of course, that the United States is by far, sort of the largest client of the Panama Canal here, about 2/3 of, that traffic that's coming through. But the other piece of this really does seem to be geopolitical. Trump really kind of suggesting that he's taking issue with, issues of Chinese influence. Now, it's no secret that Beijing has really tried to, sort of assert more influence, particularly in Central and South America over the last several years. If you were to connect the dots, I guess you could say, there's several ports sort of surrounding the Panama Canal. 2 of those are controlled by subsidiaries of a Hong Kong-based company. So maybe that's where the China connection here comes in. But ultimately, Guy, what this is really telling us here is that this is just part of, Trump is really kind of coming in and shaking things up. Whether that actually leads to anything material involving Panama, we have to see. But I would say that, we've already seen him shake up in other, global spheres as well.
Yeah, we nearly had Washington shaken up by the shutdown. That has not happened, but he's not stopping there. Elon Musk also out overnight saying that the Fed is absurdly overstaffed. Is this one of the big threats for 2025, that that Trump and the administration pick a fight with the Fed?
Well, Trump has certainly, kind of pushed back against the Fed, and even Federal Chairman Jay Powell before, who he appointed in the past, has kind of, suggested that maybe it's the White House that should have more influence over the Federal Reserve there. I think worth noting when it comes to Elon Musk's tweet is that the Federal Reserve, both in Washington and sort of around the nation, these regional banks all have about 24,000 staff members, smaller than sort of the equivalent Euro system here. But also, Elon Musk has been tasked, of course, in the Donald Trump administration with this Department of Government Efficiency. We just saw him sort of take this out in the course of the bill last week, slimming it down. So it not maybe necessarily surprising that he's going after the Fed as well.
Jill Desis, thank you very much indeed. This is Bloomberg. Monday the 23rd. Good morning. Welcome to The Pulse. What are we, 29 minutes past the hour? I'm Guy Johnson in London. Let's talk about the top stories this morning. Honda and Nissan signing a basic agreement for merger talks aimed at creating a new force in the world's automotive industry. The French Prime Minister's self-imposed deadline to name a new cabinet approaching. We think it's now Christmas Eve. Will we get a new government by Christmas? It's an open question. Plus, revised estimates reveal the UK economy failed to grow in the third quarter in another blow to Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Let's talk about the stock story this morning. We're watching the auto sector firmly. That's certainly one of the big stories we're watching. You've got the Tokyo element. We're watching that merger forming. You've got Volkswagen on the move as well. We're watching Novo Nordisk bounce back a little bit, though. Remember, this is Europe's biggest gainer this morning. But you need to see it in the context of the last few days, because on Friday it fell by the most on record. This after a new drug prevented it effectively leapfrogging its biggest rival, Eli Lilly, in the red-hot market for new obesity drugs. So study results of the experimental obesity shot Carasema fell short of the 25% weight loss that had been predicted. And the market reacted really strongly to this. Son of Us joins us now out of Copenhagen. Look, we saw this huge amount of value being wiped off on Friday. We're bouncing back a little bit this morning. Where is the middle ground? This data was hugely disappointing, but was it that disappointing?
I mean, yeah, it was, as you say, it was disappointing to investors. But, I mean, you would think, based on what happened on Friday, that this drug was a big flop. But it really isn't. We still saw on average more than 20% weight loss for patients on this drug. The problem for Novo was just that it had promised too much. It had said ahead of the trial that it could deliver, CagriSema could deliver 25% weight loss. So there were high expectations for it. Novo was very confident, and it missed that mark by several percentage points. And yes, we saw a huge wipe of market value on Friday. And while the stock has recovered a bit since, it's not nearly enough to recover all those losses.
So in terms of, can you just walk me through the details of what happened around this study? Because do we know the full details yet? Is this an early read on that study? Are we going to get better information further down the road? Like, what does it mean for Novo and this drug in particular?
Yeah, we will get more information further down the road. Novo will release more details next year, and those details will be important for the further assessment of the drug. And Novo has said so far that it is encouraged by the results. It still intends to launch it to market in 2026. Some of the details we're waiting for is around, to give you a background, Novo allowed allowed its patients to remain on a lower dose of CagriSema if they wanted to, rather than the usual stepping up to a high dose. And a lot of patients did just that. So the big question mark now is, why did they do that? Is it because of side effects, in which case that's obviously a negative story for Novo? Or could it just be that they were simply happy with a slower weight loss? And so those are the details that Novo will be releasing soon, and the market will be waiting for.
What impact did this have in Denmark? I'm really curious. This is a relatively small country. This is a very big stock. It has a disproportionate impact on the stock market. It can move the currency. A lot of people obviously will hold this stock. What was the view? How much shock was there in Denmark over this weekend after what happened Friday?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on several times during this year talking about the disproportionate impact on Novo Nordisk on Danish economy, and how the country is really getting very dependent on this one company. And of course, on Friday, as a Dane, it was a bit scary to see how much of a hit that one single piece of news could have on Novo's share price. Danes would have felt it across pension fund values and their investment portfolios. We saw the krona weaken, but really it also raises the question, raises a reminder that for long-term growth, Denmark really needs to look beyond just this one company and see what else could be a future growth driver for the country.
Sana, we've appreciated all the coverage this year. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Sana Was joining us out of Copenhagen on what is happening with Novo Nordisk. Let's turn our attention to what's happening here in the UK. So we've had some data out this morning. It doesn't exactly paint a particularly positive picture for the UK economy. Retail sales growth certainly less than anticipated, growing more slowly than anticipated in November. We're obviously now into December. The numbers suggest Christmas shoppers might not actually deliver that big a boost for the economy in these crucial final months of the year. Bruce Findlay, Managing Director of Retail at Landsec, which owns some of the biggest shopping centres in the UK, joins us now. Bruce, we've had GDP data out this morning as well. None of it paints a particularly positive picture. So I'm interested to get your take, kind of boots on the ground take, as to what is happening with the UK retail story going into the Christmas period. What are you seeing?
Good morning, Guy. We actually we did have a challenge in November with Black Friday actually falling on our December figures. But Black Friday was a tremendous performance period from that Friday through the weekend into Cyber Monday. We actually saw footfall up almost 10% and had some record-breaking sales in our outlet channel.
Do you get a sense that people are spending more? What are people spending their money on? Kind of, if they are going out shopping, are they going out and spending significant amounts of money? What is the correlation between footfall and spend?
Yeah, so I was out this Saturday in Bluewater in Kent, one of our larger shopping centres, and the footfall there was tremendous. There's, of course, a lot of last-minute shoppers coming out. One of the growth categories we've seen all year is in the health and beauty and the general wellness. And Sephora, who'd had a store opening there recently, we had 750 people queuing up overnight to be part of the grand opening the next day. And I think that just shows the resilience of the UK shopper. And when you get your product right, the brands in our shopping centres can really perform.
What do you think happens next year? A lot has been made recently of the fact that businesses aren't happy with what happened with the national insurance contributions, that ultimately we're going to see fewer people being employed or potentially people being laid off as a result of that. Are people going into next year kind of glass half empty, or is the glass half full?
Of course, this golden period, golden quarter is really essential for the retailers to set them up going into next year and clear through their inventories. We're hearing mostly positive things. We're seeing our store rollout and leasing continue to have the momentum we saw coming out of the pandemic. So, of course, that's not to dismiss those macro challenges out there. But as far as employment, everyone's been gearing up through the Christmas period. Yep. So we're pretty optimistic.
In terms of that national insurance contribution, one of the biggest kind of voices that has come out against that has been the retail sector. How big an impact... is that going to have an impact? Are they going to be employing fewer people? Are we going to see a less optimistic retail sector as a result of some of the tax changes that are coming through?
Those are definitely challenges that are well traveled out there from the big retailers, from M&S, Next, the supermarkets. But they've all had a lot of work from the pandemic till now. The strong have worked hard on their P&Ls. And even with inflation, they're working hard not to pass on those price pressures to their customers where possible.
In terms of investment going forward, where are retailers investing? What is it that they are investing in? Is it storefront? Is it stores? Is it what is happening with the warehousing? Is it happening with the kind of the omni-channel investment that we see from brands like Zara in terms of the ability to track a lot of inventory and understand what that inventory is doing? As we look into 2025, Bruce, where are they going to be investing? Where does the retail space invest its money next year?
Well, that's a great question. When you look at a brand like Zara, they've been very, very clear on their strategy on fewer, bigger and better stores. That allows them to bring their whole range together. So recently in Trinity and Leeds, we had an empty Topshop unit and they came in there with their new flagship concept that brings men's, women's, kids, and of course all their omni-channel click and collect services, which is another big driver of footfall to our schemes. So retailers are investing in those great shop fits. They're investing particularly in experience, and whether that's great staff or the actual store environment itself and the digital connection. Because as you said, it's an omni-channel world. Shipping from store, being smart with inventory, click and collect, getting the consumers to come in there and browse their collections.
Just kind of wrapping it up, what do consumers want when they come shopping these days? And how much is that now evolving post-pandemic? I see so many of these big retail areas now having all kinds of other things bolted onto them. Cinemas seem to be increasingly popular, as far as I can tell. How is the shopping experience evolving?
Well, it's always been about experience, but now that experience ranges from great food, and of course it's about the social aspect, the people being out dining with their friends, with their loved ones, their family. The cinema industry is a great example. And of course, those the difficulties they faced this year have been well noted. But the recent performance of Gladiator, Wicked, and this has been a great boost to the cinema industry as one of the best months in terms of box office. So even there, you see where you get your product right, people will come out, and those shared experiences are really key.
And just to kind of wrap it up, what do you think's going to just kind of? You were out at the weekend. You talked about Sephora doing very well. Is that going to be the big trend this Christmas as we look back on Christmas as we enter 2025? What do you think is going to be the standout story from this Christmas?
It's a tough question because the shoppers are so hard to predict. I think we're going to see the leading retailers continue to perform well, whether it's in the sports categories where you see people like JD Sports, right through to M&S continuing their great run. We're anticipating most of the categories to really see an uptick as the consumers come out and vote with their feet and their wallets.
Bruce, have a great Christmas. We'll look forward to hearing from you in the new year and see what kind of a Christmas it's been. Bruce Findlay, Managing Director of Retail, joining us from Landsec. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to turn our attention back to the auto space. Volkswagen and unions reaching a deal to keep plants open in Germany, but the auto giant still faces a very bumpy road ahead. We're going to look more closely at the challenges next. This is Bloomberg. Monday the 23rd, welcome back. Let's talk about some of the other stories that are making news this morning. The Kremlin has confirmed that President Vladimir Putin and Slovakia's Prime Minister discussed the looming end of a Ukrainian-Russia transit agreement to send gas to Europe. Russia's TASS news agency reported the Kremlin saying the situation is, quote, difficult. The gas agreement will likely end on January the 1st when Kyiv shuts down all supplies. Robert Fico made a rare visit to Moscow by a European leader. Haven't seen much of that. These are pictures that come from the weekend. Let's turn our attention to what is happening in Germany. A German judge has ordered pre-trial detention for a man suspected of driving a car into a German Christmas market in Magdeburg. The incident left 5 dead and dozens more injured. The 50-year-old man has been identified as a doctor of Saudi origin who works in the region. Authorities are investigating his potential motives, including an early warning from the Saudi authorities. And a senior leader from Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party is calling for an antitrust act to limit the influence of Elon Musk. Dirk Weiser told Bloomberg the act would lead to a breakup of Musk companies, which he called monopolistic. The world's richest man, triggering controversy last week when he voiced support for Germany's far-right AfD party on his social media platform X. Musk also called for Scholz to resign following Friday's Christmas market attack. Let's talk about the automotive sector. And we've been watching all morning the news coming out of Tokyo and what is happening with Honda, Nissan and Mitsubishi. But let's turn our attention now to talk about what is happening with Volkswagen. Volkswagen reaching Friday an agreement with its labour leaders to try and keep German plants open while cutting capacity at its namesake brand, Volkswagen. The rise of China's EV industry, of course, has left Volkswagen in a tough spot. So Bloomberg Originals has been looking at the existential challenges that this company is facing and the knock-on effect for Europe's biggest economy.
Cars are integral to Germany's modern economic and industrial identity, a pop cultural export and political lightning rod. 87-year-old Volkswagen embodies this on a global scale.
It employs 680,000 people around the world. It has dozens of production locations. Millions of people, workers in other industries, are reliant on the business that they get from this company.
It owns several household names. Some of those households are very wealthy indeed, while others descend from VW's principal demographic.
There was a big celebration in Germany to mark the 1 millionth people's car since the war.
The whole idea of the people's car was that every individual in the country would be able to afford one.
Decades later, in 2023, VW's portfolio generated 320 billion euros in sales, equivalent to about 7.5% of Germany's entire GDP from that year.
It's well worth a watch. You can see the full documentary on your Bloomberg terminus, also available on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Originals YouTube channel. Up next, we're going to take a look at what is happening in the UK. We'll look back at what a year it has been for UK markets and the economy and look forward to what we can expect from 2025. John Stepek's going to be joining me around the desk. That's next. This is Bloomberg. I know Christmas is coming, but it's a couple of days away, and therefore there is the opportunity to talk about some dismal news before we get there. And the UK economy this morning certainly providing a little bit of that. The UK economy failed to grow in the third quarter. Revised estimates basically show that since the government took over, things have got a little bit worse. In fact, they've got quite a lot worse. The figures deliver, of course, a blow to Keir Starmer, though how much attention he pays to what's happening in the Treasury is a moot point. Certainly a big blow to Rachel Reeves. The pair came to power, of course, promising to boost growth and living standards. John Stepek sat down next to me just a couple of minutes ago and said he's feeling really quite downbeat. Now, I imagine he was quite downbeat before we came into this latest quarter, so now where are we? Let's find out. OK, you're even more downbeat now. Why?
Well, I think the issue is I came into this year because I'm actually feeling quite optimistic about the economy, and I think most people did. Yeah. It's almost, I mean, it's been a year of two halves, guy. You know, it's like, definitely. You know, we've had 6 months in which, at the start of the year, in which the economic news was getting ever so slightly better. Interest rates were expected to come down reasonably rapidly. And also people were looking forward to getting rid of a government that was kind of old, long in the tooth and very much detested. And so then we got the election, and immediately the new government went from being quite sort of talking in a city-friendly way, a business-friendly way, to, you know, complaining about the mess that had been left by the last lot, which is understandable from a political point of view, but from a confidence point of view, it was like a punch in the face. And then the budget was, to put it bluntly, was anti-business, like actively anti-business. The choice to raise employers' national insurance contributions had the predictable impact of basically making most businesses decide to go on a hiring freeze. So basically we came in with people looking forward to getting rid of one government, and we're going out with people still looking forward to getting rid of a government that they can't get ready for another 4 years.
Rachel Reeves apparently is going around telling everybody that she's a fighter, and that she's going to have a big reset at the beginning of next year. How big is it going to have to be? What does she need to do?
I mean, she would have to U-turn on. The employer NI thing is the big thing. Yeah. Because that's the thing that is, if it's going to mess anything up, it's going to... What you've done is you've turned around to businesses and said, here's a whole load of new costs that you're going to have to bear on top of the rising minimum wage and kind of changes in regulation. And that's why the immediate impact on any sensible business is, OK, well, we need to have a rethink about whether we're going to invest, whether we're going to hire. And this is why, you know, the big danger for the UK is that the employment market goes down. Because we can cope with...
Because actually employment's fairly good at the moment.
Exactly, and employment actually in the UK has basically been fine since the 2008 financial crisis. It was the one thing that we've had going for us is that most people generally have had jobs if they wanted them. You take that away, and we will have a recession that will be a nasty recession rather than, you know,
just the plain vanilla
ones. Exactly.
Let's talk about next year a little bit. So on Friday, I'm watching Novo Nordisk drop like a stone. And the kind of red light that's flashing in my head is this a warning for what could happen with stocks like Nvidia?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, because the kind of two big tech hype stories this year, obviously there's been artificial intelligence, which has been the biggest one, but the other big one was the GLP-1s, and also the anti-fat drugs. And of course, Novo Nordisk was, I mean, it is now basically the Danish economy, isn't it? And so, but as you say, it kind of dropped kind of 25% because, and it wasn't even an earnings thing, it was a very small miss in the level
but expectations have been hyped.
Exactly, aye. And I mean, I can absolutely see something like that happening to AI, particularly because, I don't know, if you've, like over the past 2 weeks, the sentiment indicators, as in the informal indicators that I like to pay attention to, have just been off the charts. It's like you've had Trump as Times Magazine cover guy of the year. You've had Trump ringing the bell in the US stock exchange for the first time. You know, they say don't ring a bell at the top. He may well have literally rung a bell at the top of this market. I mean, I just don't, you know, in the latest Bank of America Global Fund Managers survey, it was called Max Americana. That's the title they put on it.
We just need the Economist's front page. Just to nail it on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, honestly, I feel we are overdue a correction, and if we don't
correction means
at least 10% off.
Everybody will just go, I'll just buy that. Thank you very much.
I mean, they might jump in and do the whole BTD thing, but I wouldn't want to commit to something as dramatic as a bear market, although I do think it's a possibility next year. But I feel that, you know, a 10% is kind of nailed on. Almost, I mean, I would be, I'm about 75% confident.
Lots of volatility around that?
Probably a lot of volatility around that.
Because other central banks are cutting. There's lots of money sloshing around the system.
Yeah, well, see, the other problem we've had this year is the interest rate issue has, you know, we went into this year thinking, for example, in the UK, we were going to get 4 rate cuts by the end of the year. We only ended up getting 2. And now the kind of market's starting to think we'll only get 2 next year. You know, I think interest rates will be the big thing to watch as well.
Great stuff, John. Always a pleasure. John Stepek, Money Distilled, worth reading. The newsletter's fantastic. Right, that wraps things up for me. Christmas shopping time. 2 days to go. Christmas is coming. This is Bloomberg.